This debate occurs in the context of the American culture wars, where more and more Americans are gradually moving towards socially liberal views. We see that in polls around support of gay marriage, we see that on movements towards decriminalised drugs, positive movements from all sorts of areas. What we say is that the Brendan Eich firing as a result of Mozilla receiving immense consumer pressure from the liberal wing of their consumers was wrong. It was wrong for the consumers to place that pressure on Mozilla. Mozilla effectively was put in a position where they had to maximise their profit. In order to do that, they had to get rid of the bad publicity. We say there should not be bad publicity associated with having a CEO who opposes gay marriage. What do we stand for in this debate? We oppose people who, in their private capacity, do not stand for conservative views, being outed from these sorts of jobs. We think it's fine for liberals to boycott businesses like Chick-fil-A, which in their business capacity lobby for anti-gay marriage views, etc., etc. Furthermore, we say that there are some views which are quite clearly so morally abhorrent that you would be justified in lobbying against them, boycotting. For example, if the CEO of Mozilla was a neo-Nazi, it would be justified in boycotting. But what we say more importantly is that this occurs in a social context of an America which is divided in a cultural war, which is still going, but which liberals are winning. What are we going to talk to you about today? I'm going to first of all say why these boycotts are harmful to those individuals and why that's wrong. Second of all, I'm going to say why this doesn't help liberal causes. And thirdly, I'm going to say why opposing socially liberal values is not so outrageous that it is deserving of boycott as opposed to boycotting on other issues. Firstly, let's talk about why these boycotts are arbitrary. Ladies and gentlemen, people happened to find out that Brendan Eich opposed gay marriage because of a $1,000 donation he made to the Proposition 8 campaign in 2008. That is a tiny form of activism, right? And it's only because California in particular has strong donation disclosure laws that it meant that people ever found out about that. If Brendan Eich had kept that view silent as opposed to making a minuscule donation, he would still be the CEO of Mozilla today. Furthermore, we say that in order for these sort of immense consumer boycotts to take shape, there needs to be a massive activist. It just so happened that OkCupid, a technological competitor of Mozilla, decided that they were going to undermine them by putting a massive message on their browser and reaching millions of viewers. It's highly unlikely that in circumstances where there was no competitor, that sort of thing would ever actually reach critical mass in terms of having a boycott. We say that when these boycotts form, moreover, there is often a lack of rational discourse. You have sort of hashtag activists who go out there with no sort of sense of actually considering or debating these issues, get really, really outraged, and eventually create so much headlines and so much news because reporting on this sort of stuff is really good clickbait that it sort of reaches critical mass and gets really bad for those consumers. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, we say that, when you look at the social context of that particular firing, in 2008, Barack Obama opposed gay marriage. Apparently his views evolved, right? It simply was not that bad of him to donate that in 2008. But no one asked Brendan Eich, has he changed his position, right? Because no one was interested in what he had to say. It was all about the outrage. We say that the fact that he was unable to take that job, which he had been pursuing for much of his career that he'd spent at Mozilla, was wrong. It was really, really bad for him. Secondly, why is this not particularly good for the liberal causes that we are quite happy to support? First of all, because we think this means that liberal causes are seen as intolerant, ladies and gentlemen. It is a mark of the fight against civil rights, that we fought against businesses not associating with black people who they didn't want to go into their bars, ladies and gentlemen. We think the fact that you disagree with someone based on a political view or based on a sort of social status they had is not a good reason to not have relationships with them in a wider context, right? It makes you seem holier than thou, and it makes you seem intolerant. In particular, when many of these views are related to Christianity. What we say is people will feel that their religion, a fundamental part of their life, is under attack, ladies and gentlemen. We say that Christians are more likely to become radical when they feel that they are under siege, and that's what you see the narrative that are developing on places like Fox News. Second of all, we don't think this changes views effectively. First of all, A, because the liberals are seen as intolerant, the very thing that they are seen to oppose, but B, because there are actually far better ways to change views, like having enlightened national conversations where clearly the idea that gay marriage will ruin marriage is ridiculous, right? And that's why more and more people are going towards liberal movements. We say we support that trend continuing. Finally, we say that people should have a right to express their political beliefs in the absence of coercive pressure which goes to their political life. You have a right to disagree with people really, really strongly, but insofar as that affects your career prospects, as it affects your job, that is wrong, and that impinges on your ability to participate in a democracy, right? Finally, let's talk about why we don't think that opposing liberal values is so outrageous that you deserve to be punished beyond being obviously beaten in a debate, right? The first thing we say is that it is clear that we would not boycott people because of their economic views, right? If the CEO of Mozilla supported a minimum wage, it would be ridiculous for the libertarian movement to boycott Mozilla, right? So clearly we don't think we should boycott people based on simply one disagreement of views, even if it's a view we strongly hold. But why might social values be different? Some people say that social values are purely based around intolerance. The fact that you oppose gay marriage suggests that you are such an intolerant person that we cannot deal with you. We say a couple of things in opposition to that. First of all, we think a lot of people are genuinely religiously motivated when they oppose gay marriage. Religion is something that they largely don't have a say in, it's dictated to them from their birth, right? We say that a lot of people, Catholics for example, won't let, a lot of Catholic churches for instance, won't let an Anglican marry within their church, right? You could say that's because they really, really hate other Christians, or you could say they just have doctrinal religious beliefs that they probably haven't thought about as much, right? We don't think they should be punished for not having that kind of thought. But finally, we say there are probably more outrageous things that liberals support that we don't boycott them for. Look at the drone war. Look at Guantanamo Bay, ladies and gentlemen. Opposition support for that is far more outrageous than opposition to gay marriage. It affects people's rights in a far more fundamental way. We say that if everyone's a hypocrite in this debate, we do not support the moral majority of liberals.
Now, to open the case for the negative side, James Rankin.
Brendan Auck donated to Proposition 8 in 2008. He made a conscious decision to donate his own money to a proposition that was going to suppress the rights of minorities in American society. If you hold those views, it is right for the market and the free market mechanism that has been used in the past to hold you accountable for holding those disgusting views. Two things in this speech. I'm firstly going to talk about why social progressive ought and have a moral duty to actually boycott these types of businesses. I'll move on after that to talk about why this is the best way of progressing with movements with respect to social change. But first, let's examine what our stance is in this debate. We don't think this needs to necessarily be done in every instance. We think in the cases where you do have big businesses like Mozilla, it is right for social progressives to use the market in order to hold those people accountable. Let's look at the four things that Nick claimed in his speech. The first thing he said was that it was very easy for you to separate your private views with respect to your place of employment. We would contest the very premise when you have employees, for instance, who know that you've made a donation to a thing that is going to suppress the rights of minorities. If you're a gay person and you work for Mozilla and you know the CEO is homophobic, it becomes very hard for you to expose your sexuality in your place of work if you think that you can't get a promotion as a result. The second thing he claimed was about discourse. He said that all we got as a result of this was hashtag activism and the like. We think the type of discourse we've gotten as a result of this is a broader social discussion about these types of views and where these types of views are going to be in the future. That's better than no views or no discussion at all, and it was unclear as to why discussion that was on Twitter was necessarily the only type of discussion, and they never showed you that it was. In terms of their analogy of Barack Obama, the difference there is that Barack Obama changed his views. Brendan Auck never did. He never came out and said, I've changed my views and I'm now in support of the people who were previously being oppressed, and that's the difference there. He didn't send the message to the people who were the most vulnerable. Barack Obama did. The final thing he claimed was that you have a right to hold views, and this was very facile insofar as it only said that. The point is, you do have a right to hold views in your private capacity, but you don't have a right to be exonerated of the consequences of holding those views. You hold views, but you're also held to account of the consequences of those views. You don't have a right to have other people not react badly to them. Your friends might react differently to them. Your constituents might hold you accountable for holding them. They never showed you why that wasn't the case. And finally, on this point of religion, you can change your religion, and we don't get the type of change if we don't actually send this message their society, their side of the house rather, results in the stagnation of those views because we never get the way in which those views are evolved. Firstly, let's talk about why we're principally justified in terms of these duties. Social progressive movements in general are about maximising freedoms for the individuals who are often the most oppressed. In the case of Brendan Auck, it was about those people who are gay and didn't have the rights to gay marriage, and he was making a conscious decision to actually suppress those rights. So the first thing to talk about here is the character of these types of views. This was pure and simple bigotry, Mr. Speaker. He was donating money to a campaign that was going to stop those people being able to have equal rights. We think more broadly, though, the point here is that as an individual in a capitalist system, where you can exercise your economic power to show your preferences, to show the types of products that you want and the types of companies that you want to support, this is a perfectly legitimate and actually aligns with your role as an individual in the capitalist system. You choose to donate your money or contribute your money to the business which you think best aligns with what you want. Insofar as some of these businesses have CEOs that hold repugnant views, it's perfectly legitimate, and we think you actually have a duty, if you're a social progressive, to use your economic power in a way that stops those views actually proliferating. Our side of the house is the one that provides for that. Moreover, we don't think if you're a social progressive you can necessarily just distance yourself from these kind of views and from the types of businesses that have CEOs who do hold these views. You shouldn't externalize yourself to the extent that you're not helping those movements to progress. You should actually say, I'm going to make a conscious choice as a consumer to not give my money to Mozilla because of the fact that they have a homophobic CEO who is actually actively contributing to stopping gay people having equal rights. That is horrible, and the reason for that is because of the fact that these views aren't acceptable. That's why these social progressives have a duty. Let's talk about why this type of boycotting is actually going to help progressive movements, and we have a few reasons why. The first is this thing to say here, the message that it sends to those who are vulnerable. When we as social progressives send a message and we say we will not support businesses who have CEOs who hold these repugnant views, that sends a powerful message to the most vulnerable in our society that we are with them in solidarity, that we won't tolerate these kind of views, and we will hold people who hold those views accountable for their bigotry. That helps those people. Secondly, is in terms of the disincentives, because for CEOs who might hold these views now, that is a massive disincentive for those people to ever express their preferences for those views. The types of CEOs who might be in charge in the future, who might want to actively suppress the rights of other minorities, are going to find it very difficult to make a similar kind of donations at the point at which they know that they might lose their job as a result. That is a good thing for those people because it means that you're not giving the types of capital to those types of campaigns that actually harm vulnerable people in this debate. Moreover, we think this creates a kind of forward-looking perspective for many CEOs and for society in general, because you have to examine your views at that now at the point in the future. Because if you hold a view that you might think is going to oppress people who are minorities or that isn't socially progressive, it forces you to critically examine your views at the point at which you know you could be held accountable for them in the future. That's the type of dialogue we get. Finally, the thing to say about employees and businesses. Because for employees at Mozilla, Mr. Speaker, they were going to find it very hard to actually suppress or be open with their sexuality when they knew that their CEO was a homophobe, essentially. Because it becomes very hard for you to distance your sexuality from your place of employment when you know that you could be discriminated against as a result. Whether or not it happens does not matter. Mr. Speaker, this is the way that social progressive movements need to get changed. We don't support these views, this is bigotry, and we're not going to stand for it any longer. Mr. Speaker, Proposition 8 passed. There are over 1 billion Christians in the world. That side of the House wants to say that none of these people should be able to have any sort of management role in society. That is outrageous, Mr. Speaker, because the whole idea of the social progressive movement is that those who are not in the moral majority are not to be segregated, they're not to be abused by those who just happen to be in the moral majority.
It was fine to donate $1,000 to Proposition 8. It was fine to vote for Proposition 8 because Obama did it. Liberals did it. Liberals vote for crazy stuff all the time. What you're going to get on that side of the house is a politicization of products in society, and that is not something that we want to do in order to win the culture war. Social progressives are already winning that war, and they should continue to do so with a sense of decency and decorum, rather than throwing their toys out of the cot every time someone expresses a private view that they legitimately hold. We oppose. What am I going to be talking? We propose. What am I going to be talking about today? I've got three things for you. What do boycotts achieve? The short answer is nothing, but I'll tell you all of the reasons why anyway. Secondly, should social progressives become the very bullies that they're diametrically opposed to? And thirdly, can people legitimately, in their private capacity, make these decisions to support causes? But first, I'd just like to say that the point that James Rankin brought up in his speech about how people absolutely do have an ability and a principled right to boycott things doesn't stack up in this debate, because we're not talking about whether people have a right to or not. We're talking about whether they have a duty to. We say absolutely you cannot prove that duty on that side of the house. So on to this first theme about what do boycotts achieve. And I said nothing. Why was that? We told you a raft of reasons. At Nick, we told you they were at best random. If we'd never found that $1,000 donation, Mozilla would still have the CEO that they had a month ago, right? And so that means that there are lots of other organisations out there who also have people who just haven't been found or will not be found. James was right on that side of the house to say that people will hide will be forced to hide their political contributions, will be forced to hide their views, and will be and will do that. The problem with this, Mr. Speaker, is that this means that only the people who weren't smart enough to hide their things, hide their donations and their views, are going to be the ones who are persecuted. And the moral outrage of social progressives and the left and the majority of people in countries is going to come down upon them. That's unfair because that achieves nothing in terms of boycotts, because it's random and because those things are never guaranteed to achieve total change in management views. But next off, we heard that, employees feel really terrible when their boss is anti-gay marriage. And that's fine, Mr. Speaker. Employees are free to boycott and leave that organisation. But the problem with boycotting that organisation is those workers are harmed, Mr. Speaker, and Bradenike doesn't change his views about gay marriage. So actually you have the worst of both worlds under their system, because the workers who feel uncomfortable are now also without a job or being asked to be paid less. So that's why boycotts achieve nothing in terms of the aims of the social progressive movement in society. Secondly then, let's talk about should social progressives become bullies. And the principle throughout the history of the social progressive movement is that sometimes you are in the moral minority, and when you're in the moral majority, then you should not bully those people who aren't in an advantaged place where you are. We think that we saw that in things like the black civil rights. It was fine when barbers refused to shave the hair of black men to boycott those businesses to show that businesses should not do that. But when you're in your private capacity, all you're doing is bullying that person for an individual opinion that they hold. What did they say about that? They said, these private opinions flow over. But we say, Mr. Speaker, that these opinions are, first off, sometimes justified, and second off, are not going to be changed in any way by that. And we just reject the assumption on that side of the house that Mozilla was like an anti-gay web browser, and that it discriminated against gays in that way. But secondly, even if you don't agree with the fact that social progressives should stick to their principles and their goals and their aims, we think that their cause isn't helped by this. Why is that? Because they're now seen as intolerant. They used to be the ones who were all about peace and love, but now they're the ones who get on Facebook and Twitter, probably from Google Chrome, and say, this man is an evil man, and we hate this guy, and we wanted to drag his name through the mud. That doesn't help their cause, because the main buy into social progressiveness is being able to relate to people who want to better those people who aren't in positions of power. Secondly, though, we also say that the cause this is not unnecessary. The battle for social progressiveness is won, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely not all states have gay marriage, but I bet you $100 that in 10 years every single one will. This doesn't achieve anything for the social progressive movement, it just undermines it, Mr. Speaker. And in the next point, is that in 10 years we might not have gay marriage if these people bully back. Why is that? Because they're pushed into a corner, and there are people who are religious and have religious views. And when they say, well, customers aren't going to buy my product, so screw them, I'm going to politicise my product and my business and make it so that it's specifically for conservatives. So you have all of the conservative anti-gay people using Mozilla, and you have all of the homos and the liberal people using Chrome, and then you have a wider culture war in society that doesn't actually achieve anything, because it doesn't matter which browser you use, Mr. Speaker. It does not matter in terms of getting results for people who can't marry you. And so that's why those people are going to turn to bully back. We say that it's not okay to punish people for views that are acceptable and that are held by people in terms of morals. We don't think that social progressives should be socially backwards. We propose.
And I'd like to welcome the second speaker from the negative side, James Penn.
Yes.
Let's be clear, Mr. Speaker. This debate is not about saying that if someone held a view in the past and changes their mind today, we have to continue boycotting them at every step of the way into the future. We're not saying that you have to vote for someone other than Obama when he has changed his view. What we're saying is that when Brendan Auck holds a view in the past and when he is challenged on that view today, refuses to back down from it, essentially stays silent and hopes that the media move on from that issue, that progressives at that point should take that as him saying he still believes in those views and they should, as consumers, not be hypocritical and they should feel a moral responsibility to those who aren't able to externalise themselves from the situations. They should feel a moral responsibility to the victims of the vitriolic views that those people hold, and they should put their money where their mouth is, essentially, and support those views in their oppose those views in the decisions they make as a consumer. I'm going to look at two questions. One, where do our responsibilities lie as a consumer, and are there fairness issues that override this? Second, how do we best achieve progression with these issues in society, as it was taken from both teams that they are positive. On the first issue, this side of the House initially told us that you just have a general right to hold views as a private individual, and you should be able to just keep those separate from everything else you do in your life. That flew in the face of the reality, which is that we are social beings, Mr. Speaker. Everything we do is affected by our private views. The fact that we go out for drinks with friends means that our private views will play into that discussion that we have. The logic of this side of the House is that you should never penalise someone for their private views, and therefore, at the point at which someone makes a sexist comment, you should say, well, that's your view to hold. I'm not going to say refuse to go for a drink again with you in the future. We would say, in particular, as we would say further to that these views aren't just private. They are views which affect your ability to operate as a CEO. We told you about the way it affects how your employees often feel, because the reality is often these things will be uncovered or will just be out there from the very start. You may have had a press release in a previous company that you were in that related to that particular socially conservative view. So your employees feel marginalised as a result and are less comfortable, for example, with their sexuality in that business. We had no response on that harm from this side of the House, except to say, well, the employees under your system just have to leave the business. No, the point is the CEO leaves the business under our system, and Brendan Auck is no longer there, and therefore those employees are more comfortable in their workplace. But further, we would say, in direct response to their arbitrariness point, the fact that not every single CEO is exposed is indicative of the fact that it's not arbitrary. Why? Because we expose the ones who are CEOs of the biggest companies. Who are these people? The ones with the most political influence, where their private views do affect what they do in their role as a corporate citizen. So, for example, Brendan Auck probably had a number of high-level meetings with other individuals in the tech industry, with other individuals within the government and things like that, and have much more of an ability to do that. And when they make a stance or want a meeting, for example, with a local government official, they're far more likely to get it. So it's not arbitrary that we target these types of people. In fact, it's very beneficial because these are the people where their private views most affect their corporate world. Finally, they told you that, well, the fact that you are religious means that you have no choice in the ability to hold these views. We think that's absolutely rubbish. A huge amount of religious individuals have changed their views over time, and all socially progressive views are essentially compatible with religion. We've seen that as society has moved towards accepting more and more things that in the past religion hasn't. But moreover, we would say precisely the fact that the default position is you're frozen in those religious views means we need to have social consequences for holding them. Otherwise, you are just left to continue to hold them and isolate yourself from the actual effect of them. But why, as an individual, is it your responsibility as a consumer to not externalize yourself from that, from the view of the CEO? The primary reason is simply because you're in a position that is more privileged than your victims, than the victims of those policies. The fact that you're able to say, I'm going to continue to buy a product and not suffer the consequences of the private views and the donations this person has made, means that you have a responsibility to actually stand up and fight for those victims who can never externalize themselves as you can. But moreover, we would say you just have a responsibility to not be hypocritical. And we would also point to the fact that the burden on this side of the House in the debate is to prove that you are never able to boycott these businesses. What if you are a gay individual and using Mozilla Firefox makes you feel really conflicted inside because you are effectively supporting the salary of someone who's tried to suppress your rights in the past? They have to prove that those people have to basically grin and bear that and never boycott those CEOs. We think that is something that is unreasonable to expect of consumers in a capitalist system. Moving on to progression and how we best achieve it. What we told you first of all, and what we never got a response to, was that when we do achieve that change, the message to other CEOs is incredibly important because it encourages people to be very forward-thinking in terms of not just what is deemed acceptable or a 50-50 issue now, but where society is moving. And what that means is that you get more rapid change on these socially progressive issues. Both sides of the House agree that these socially progressive causes are ones which maximise equality and liberty in the world, and they're ones that we should strive towards. We think their assertion that you get no change whatsoever and that there's no importance for urgency is absurd, because every single day that gay individuals in states in America can't marry is a day where their rights are being abridged, and a day where they don't have the rights of every other citizen in America. We think that is abhorrent. But the arguments that this just creates poor discussion is also absurd, because on the back of that discussion you have debates like this. You have newspaper articles which discuss those issues in more detail, and we also think it mobilises the masses who would otherwise be dispassionate. We're incredibly proud to propose this dangerous policy.
We now move to the summary speeches. So I'd like to welcome back the leader of the negative team, James.
Battle for social progress, Mr. Speaker, is not yet won. If we allow these views to continue reside in the minds of CEOs, to continue to lie there unchallenged, we don't get the type of social progress that both sides have achieved. Two issues in reply. Firstly, are there duties incumbent on these types of social progressives to boycott? Secondly, what is the effect of progressive movements? On the first issue, Nick told you that you have a right to hold views that were private and they should be completely separate from how this affects you, for instance, in your workplace. We gave you reasons as to why this wasn't true. The first reason was that you do have a right to hold views, and we never contested that. But what we did say is that you don't have a right to be free of the consequences of those views. And we gave you examples of how this plays out in everyday life. They never challenged that. What they did try to say in terms of this principle, they tried to play down, basically, the types of views that these CEOs held. They said that Brendan Auck donated at a time when Barack Obama donated. We gave you the difference. The difference was that Barack Obama has changed his views in the meantime, and he's actually come out in support of gay marriage. Brendan Auck never did that. He never sent the message to those vulnerable minorities who were otherwise oppressed by those types of propositions. We gave you substantive reasons as to why this was justified and why it was something that was desirable for the social progressives to pursue. We told you it was consistent with your role as a consumer in the capitalist system where you can express preference. We told you about how these views were akin to bigotry, how they did contribute to the suppression of the rights of minorities, and they were never able to tell you as to why those were duties that shouldn't exist in this debate. This issue of duties fell to us. Secondly, the